Welcome to PICT Voices, the interview series conducted by faculty members of the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking with notable members of the broader PICT community. Our goal is to present you with a variety of voices from across the spectrum of the humanities, the arts, and critical creative thinking. My name is David Selim Sayers, and in this episode, it is my great pleasure to welcome Michelle Coursey and Jessica Padilla, professional makeup artists based in New York City. Both Michelle and Jessica can look back on quite awe-inspiring careers in the world of makeup, ranging from fashion magazines to runway shows and popular TV programs. But what unites them, perhaps more than anything else, is a passion for the history and social significance of makeup. In fall 2018, Jessica and Michelle co-taught the two-day PICT workshop, Makeup Through the Decades, in which they gave applied demonstrations of vintage makeup styles while discussing the history of makeup in the first half of the 20th century. Jessica, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
It's a real pleasure to have you guys on the show. It's a shame that we haven't been able to see each other in person for so long. But yeah, let me just start off with a general question concerning the purpose of makeup, because I think that we mostly associate makeup with the cultivation of some notion of beauty. But makeup has historically served many other purposes as well, for instance, in religious rituals or as war paint. And so what I wanted to ask was, if it is not the creation of beauty, is there some kind of more fundamental purpose that all forms of makeup have in common?
Can I go, Jess?
Yeah, you go first and then I'll add to it.
I think when I was doing my very brief research for this, I think it always just came down to wealth, power, status, and sex or sexuality is really what it came down to. And also how others perceive you and the image you're trying to present to the world, whether you're trying to seduce someone or intimidate someone or show how powerful you are. That's really the kind of the through line of makeup, or even if you chose not to wear makeup or were not allowed to wear makeup, it all came back to being perceived in a certain way or how God saw you or something along those lines.
Yeah, I was sort of doing some preliminary research again last night too, and I think for me the pull and the power of makeup is sort of about the power of transformation. And I think that, you know, beyond the practical uses, because there were very practical uses in the past where, you know, it was for camouflage from your enemies or predators, or like in Egypt, it was the eye kohl that actually worked against preventing eye infection, or it was like sun protection, but unfortunately it also caused, there was some lead in it, so it also caused blindness. But there were like lots of practical purposes for it. But then you have this other side where it's more of a psychological thing, where it's ceremony and tradition and, you know, passing habits down from generation to generation, you know, moms that passed it to daughters, that passed it to their daughters. And I think there's something about the psychology of makeup that runs beyond beauty. You know, if you've ever worked, Michelle and I both worked in retail at one point in our lives. And if you've ever been a retail makeup artist, you know that women have a deep, deep psychological connection to color and the way makeup makes them feel. And, you know, you had mentioned at one point, like war paint, and that makeup was used for that. And I've always sort of felt like makeup was putting on of an armor and sort of like a protection, or, you know, the way that I would like the world to see me. And I feel like that's sort of universal. I don't think I'm the only one that sometimes uses makeup as a tool of like armor to set myself to get ready, you know?
Absolutely. So you've been touching on something very fundamental about the way that makeup informs sort of others' perception of us, and the way that we want to transform ourselves, or the way that we want to appear to others, and that's not limited to projecting a sense of beauty. And
it's not necessarily just about looking pretty or good. It's much deeper than that, more powerful than that, frankly.
Yeah, and you have also mentioned, and that sort of neatly brings me to my next question, that makeup has been around for a very, very long time. It has literally, I don't know if makeup is as old as clothing, but it has literally been with us throughout the ages. And there are extant prehistoric makeup products that people have dated back many millennia. So the question that I wanted to ask you, since you've already touched on contexts such as Egypt, was what was makeup really like before modern times, before the 20th century? Can you share some insights to help us imagine the pre-modern world of makeup?
Michelle, do you want to go first or do you want me to jump in?
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makeup in the beginning, I mean, there was some belief that like maybe even as early as like prehistoric times, you know, they were using makeup for camouflage or body paint or some sort of, you know, ochre. It was all made of natural things. I mean, you had nuts and minerals and flowers and bugs and fish scales and beetles and you know, they would grind it up and mix it with animal fat or vegetable oil or resin or wax. I mean, it was very rudimentary, but in some ways, like some things really haven't changed that much. Like the eye kohl that they make in the Middle East is kind of the same that it's been for centuries. You know, I mean, that's one example of something that hasn't changed, but of course there's things that have definitely changed with technology and the times. But I think that it was, you know, it was basically something you would mix at home in the earlier,
Yeah.
or in your cave or whatever. I mean, it was definitely do it yourself and make it, or, you know, the high priest would make it. I don't
Yeah.
know, every culture didn't necessarily have access to makeup for everyone. Like I think Egypt was sort of a special time.
Uh-huh.
There's also a correlation between women wearing makeup and the power that they have. And in Egypt, women could like own land and they had a little bit more freedom. And so when you see that throughout history, you see, you know, more access. Otherwise, you know, men could wear it, especially like, you know, in ceremony.
I think pre 20th century there's a real, like if you look at the huge overview of makeup, there's this extreme the acceptance of it and then extreme non-acceptance of it. It's very much between pre-Christian days and early Christianity, and then, you know, women weren't allowed to wear anything at all, and then and the Renaissance became more acceptable, and it really these huge pendulum swings about when it was acceptable and when it wasn't acceptable, because I believe I read something really interesting that in the pre-Christian days they wanted to distance themselves from paganism, where beauty was celebrated and considered a gift from God, and cleanliness was considered good. And then very early Christians really wanted to distance themselves from that, and, you know, from cleanliness and beauty and all those things. And then beauty was considered a gift from God, and then it was okay. So it was like, see these big, you know, like I said, big pendulum swings between the two. And it always was very closely intertwined with religion and, you know, how much power women had at any given time in history as well.
Right.
Well, there was also that idea of like deception, right? And women
Right,
and
absolutely.
being the deceivers and like fooling the men and like
Absolutely.
the evilness of you know, of some lipstick.
Right. Or, you know, how dare you want to change what God created, which is something we still hear today, actually, by changing it even through makeup. And also, like you said, deceiving the sumptuary laws and things like that. You know, the Puritans, you know, it's just this, I love seeing those swings back and forth that we even see in the decades now of the 20th century.
But I mean, this actually, what you've been saying, it brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you guys about sort of makeup and notions of morality, because you've been touching on that a lot, and you've been pointing out that in certain historical and cultural contexts, and for certain population segments, the use of makeup has been morally or even legally off limits. I mean, we can speak about times in history, certain periods in history, early Christianity, as you already mentioned. But also right now, I mean, if you go around the world, I'm sure you'll find a lot of places where it's considered less acceptable, and also certain population segments. Meaning, I mean, you've been talking a lot about makeup and women, but then again, the question poses itself about sort of the connection between makeup and gender, right? I mean, if you're a man, right, at least in our societies, in order to reinforce your masculinity or in order to preserve your masculinity, you're not supposed to wear makeup. So it makes you less of a man, I suppose, if you wear makeup, right? And in other contexts, it's almost the opposite, and persons not using makeup can find themselves stigmatized or marginalized, right? So why do you think that makeup and morality make for such a volatile combination? I mean, what is it that connects these two things to each other?
I think it has to do with visibility and freedom. You know, makeup, it's like the, the male birds with their big feathers and the more colorful, it's a presentation. You're not hiding if you're wearing makeup.
You know, shaking up.
If you're doing like a big look or something really fabulous, it's a statement, and it's there's a lot of power in that and freedom in that. And I think, power is always threatening to some people.
Absolutely. And also,
and I-
like, I'm sorry, Jess.
No, go ahead.
Also through history, women have always been considered, I mean, often, I should say, not at every time, but they're usually considered, they're a weaker sex, and they're just there for their beauty. So even today, with some men don't want to be considered feminine, and they view that as a weakness. And I think it's really exciting to see, at least in New York, and I realize we're kind of in a rarefied bubble here to a certain extent. But I think in major cities, I'll go so far to say, like, it's really exciting to see men leaning more into it, and wearing makeup more in public. Like, even in the past year, I've seen so many more like younger men wearing makeup in public, and I think that's really, really great. And
So would you say, Michelle, then that we're actually, could we be witnessing a time where the sort of intrinsic connection between makeup and femininity and no makeup and masculinity, on the other hand, do you think that's breaking down? Do you think that makeup is no longer going to be considered as something that makes you automatically feminine or not?
Yeah, I think we are actually. I think that's one of the good things that's come out of social media and YouTube and all those things, because we've seen these, male influencers wearing makeup and leaning into it and showing that men can wear makeup and look good and be just as powerful. So I definitely feel like with social media, we are definitely seeing a shift, at least towards younger men, especially younger men, kind of embracing makeup and seeing that it doesn't necessarily have to be
And I mean,
or bad.
In general, like, heteronormative gender roles are breaking down all over the place.
I was going to say that too. I'm saying male and female in a very binary way.
Yeah,
so I'm not trying to offend anyone by saying that.
Yeah, it's just, I think that, like, it's just become more acceptable to be more fluid in everything, whether that's the way you dress, or, people aren't necessarily like, oh, I have to go to the women's section or the men's section. It's all kind of, at least, we see it in New York. And again, it could be a bubble, but it's a start. I think that's kind of just in general the way it's going to go. But, I mean, I would love that to be forever, but there have definitely been times, like in the 90s, there was a big like grunge rock kind of push for like men's makeup. Like Urban Decay did a whole thing for like men's makeup, and like Dennis Rodman and like Chris Cornell. And like there were all these like rock stars who wore like nail polish and eyeliner. I'm still a huge fan of that. I love that look. But there were a lot of men embracing like hard, kind of sloppy, grungy, sexy, worn in makeups. And so, I mean, I was thinking that was going to stay, and then it kind of disappeared. So it's hard to say if it's forever, but I mean, I think in terms of like the pendulum swing long term, I mean, I think we're getting to a place where like you can do what you want and be who you want and represent the way you want, and that's never a bad thing.
That's reassuring. That's that's good to hear. You guys have been mentioning you've been touching on the connection between makeup and entertainment. You've been talking about, Michelle, you've been mentioning influencers, and Jessica, you've been talking about 90s figures like Dennis Rodman and Chris Cornell. And that brings me actually to a question that I wanted to ask about the connection between makeup and entertainment, because the two have gone hand in hand for a long time. Many global makeup trends were introduced thanks to popular forms of entertainment, from the extremely influential ballet russe at the beginning of the 20th century to Hollywood icons, and all the way to today's social media influencers. So what are your thoughts on the intertwined histories of makeup and entertainment?
I mean, it's interesting because it goes back as far as, the I can't think of the right word, but back in the Middle Ages, when the pageants would come through little towns, that's like the only time it was acceptable to wear makeup, basically, is if you were on stage doing a morality play, basically. So I think it's really interesting to see how that connection has always gone far and has gone that far back. And I think it's always about, it comes down to emulating people and emulating what you want to be.
Maybe it's a little bit of fantasy, right? Like maybe it's that aspirational, wanting to be, wanting to have, wanting to transform again, like the power of you know, media and Hollywood. And I mean, Hollywood had a huge, I mean, we did almost a whole entire class on it, but like a huge influence on makeup becoming accessible to everybody and making it normal for regular women to wear makeup, you know, because before that it was pretty much like Michelle was saying, like performers and ladies of the night. I mean, you just didn't really wear it. And then, you know, Hollywood came along and kind of normalized makeup, which they needed for film and television, but then, you know, it became a glamorous thing. It became something that every woman wanted to have.
Yeah.
And since you can't necessarily be a movie star, at least you could look like a movie star. And
Right.
I feel like that's sort of still, you know, that's still the social
Still
media
happens,
whole.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about, yeah, emulating someone that you want, even if it's an influencer or a movie star or a model or whatever it is. I think it is about the fantasy of being like, if I buy this lipstick, I will look like Greta Garbo or Charlize Theron or someone like that.
Right.
I think it's always what it comes down to is
And maybe, you know, you can't have that $40,000 handbag, but you can buy that $30 lipstick.
Absolutely.
Right.
Accessible
Yeah.
in a
Right.
way.
Absolutely. And I mean, that actually also, I think, goes a way towards showing us what actually changed about makeup in the 20th century as opposed to before the 20th century. Because you guys were talking about, for instance, medieval pageants and things like that, where people might have had some kind of exposure to makeup, but never on the mass scale that they had in the 20th century. Can you tell us a little bit about how developments in the 20th century, I mean, not just in terms of entertainment, but also in terms of industrialization and science, you know, how did they change the history of makeup, and why is the 20th century such a big break, or such a big turning point in the history of makeup?
I mean, it's so many things happening at the same time. It's media, like we said, it's the technology available, it's the Industrial Revolution, it's people having more spare time and not having to toil in the fields, basically. It's women's rights, and then you have World War I happening at the beginning, which is aligning with the women's rights movement. And then so they have the technology, they take some of the technology from World War I and put that towards makeup. And then it was just this huge confluence. And then media is getting more and more popular. Travel is getting easier. So people can see these images. There are more magazines that are being printed so they can see them, what's happening in other countries. And it was just this, when I read this question, I was like, whoa, it was just so much happening at the same time. And it made me think of something I had read in a book recently that is kind of related, but it was someone wrote something that said, basically, if you dropped an alien on Earth in the year 1300 and the year 1800, things wouldn't be that much different. People were still working in the fields. They were still, there was a very agrarian society. But then if you fast forward 100 years or 150 years to 1950, like think of the change in that amount of time. So I think, think about, and then the changes in makeup in that time too. So I think we have to look at it again as like this whole picture thing. And there really was that huge confluence of all of these factors happening at the beginning of the 20th century that allowed it to become more popular.
Even now, it's interesting to see how technology, like I look around sometimes and I'm like, oh, this is the future. We have like computers in the palms of our hands, and my husband is actually staying at a hotel right now that has like literally a robot that brings you like a towel. Like the robot gets on the elevator and like brings you something. It's like wild
and stuff,
and I'm like, oh my God, the future is now. Like the future is here. And you don't see it a lot in beauty makeup, but like 3D printing has really changed the face of like special effects. Like you don't necessarily need to life cast somebody and like stick them in all this plaster. You could like 3D print their face, which is like so much faster and less frustrating for an actor and less time consuming. And, it's not super accessible on the level that everyone has that ability yet, but it's coming, and there's also, I've talked about this with you both like at various times, but I also wonder, about this homogenization of makeup globally. Like it's this weird thing where like, now that we can all see each other all around the world, there might be this, I think it's like this pressure to all look the same, because when you look at like the Instagram makeups and the things that are becoming popular and everyone's like, you can have all these women of like different skin tones and ethnicities and have them all look virtually the same. It's kind of like this weird, every ethnicity, no ethnicity, like very makeup, very specific shapes. And, it brings me to the idea, like when we were young in the 90s, there was this like experimentation with makeup that was encouraged. Like people were coming out with like really weird colors, and it was like the future was coming, and everything was like metallic and synthetic and glittery and like interesting, and no rules. It was like anything goes everywhere. But now there's so many tutorials, and there's so many people being like, well, this is the placement for this, and you have to have 17 products, and the contour goes here, and the boop highlighter goes there, and it's like, but everyone's starting to look the same, and I can't say that I love it, but it's it's almost like when you mix all the colors together and you get gray. And I feel like we're like in that place right now with makeup where there's this pressure for marketing to like sell all these things to everybody, and it's just making gray.
That's really interesting because, I mean, in some cases, I don't know if you feel, do you feel that the same thing is happening in fashion? Because, for instance, when I look at fashion, I see a lot of influence from a lot of different world cultures, et cetera, et cetera. So sort of something, the diversity of the available fashions around the world goes into keeping the industry vibrant, right? But you don't feel that the same thing is happening with makeup.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I think there's this interesting dichotomy between makeup, and that I think what you said, Jessica, is super true in terms of like social media and that world. But then there's this other side of things where it's like people are really leaning into like the creative side of it. So it's like you have, the people, the group that is, super homogenized and doing like the, kind of the paint by number makeup. And then there's this other type of makeup that is just like super creative and, like putting blue eyeshadow on their forehead and doing whatever they want, because it's just because, balls to the walls, like who cares anymore?
I hope so. I hope the kids are at home experimenting. I really hope so.
Yeah, I feel like I see that sometimes on the street, and I'll be like, yeah, I love that. Which is funny because my personal aesthetic is very, very classic and natural. But when I see other people, I'm like, yeah, put that blue eyeshadow on your forehead. I love it. But I think because there's so much creativity out there and it's so much more accessible, I feel like the other side of that, and they're existing at the same time and near each other, is that there is this extreme beauty is much more okay.
Right. And I mean, you're talking about this kind of standardization in a way that comes with a sort of emergence of this immense industry, this multi-billion makeup industry, and kind of the desire to market and sell certain kinds of products. So a kind of taking makeup in a predetermined, let's say, direction that serves a certain purpose. And that brings me actually to something that I wanted to ask you guys about. And you also touched earlier, Michelle, you were talking about the role of makeup, sort of how makeup was developed after World War One, thanks to new technologies that came into play during the war. And so I wanted to tie it all up into a question about makeup and political history, because I've heard both of you talk about the important role that makeup has played in political history, ranging from wars such as World War II to modern political campaigns, where it has been shown that assistance by makeup professionals has a significant impact on chances of election. So I was going to ask you to elaborate a little bit on the political history of makeup, and specifically on the deployment of makeup to achieve political aims.
I mean, I think that's such a good question. I think actually just a little tidbit that I found out about this was in the I believe it was the early 1740s, sometimes in the 1700s, when patches were popular, women would patch on either side of their face to distinguish which party they were in favor of. So Whigs on one side, Tories on the other. This was in England. Or if you were neutral, you'd patch on both sides. So I think that's just a great tidbit of like, and when they were getting married, that one woman had it in her prenup that she was allowed to patch on whatever side she wanted, regardless of what her husband thought, which I think is amazing.
It's kind of funny because like this year, for the first time ever, I watched like the Republican convention.
Yeah.
And I feel, just
Great
because I was
soul.
like, well, I'm home and we're doing this. So yeah, I watched it and it was really fascinating. Something that we all kind of commented on was like all the women, it looked like they all hired the same makeup artist. Like they all had the same look, right down to like the pink lip gloss and the same kind of eyeshadow. And it's like, in a way, we're still kind of doing that today,
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of a representation of like what they were doing with those patches.
So you
It's like
feel that makeup is
solidarity.
it becomes some kind of political uniform almost.
Right.
It can
Yeah.
be.
Well,
And I
it's also,
mean, oh, go ahead.
it's even for men, like, they want to appear the most attractive and the most powerful, the most virile. And I think there's that famous story about Kennedy versus Nixon, about
Yeah, I
how
was just gonna say that. Yep.
exactly Nixon didn't want to go on screen next to Kennedy because he knew Kennedy was so much better looking, and so much more attractive and just appealing. So men feel it too, and it's a real thing. And sorry to keep them through these tidbits, but I think they're so interesting. Was the story of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, getting a letter from a little girl saying you should grow a beard because you're not that attractive, and if you grow a beard,
God.
and you'll be more handsome, and women will tell their husbands to vote for you. So it goes back that far.
I mean,
it's really
this
interesting.
is like an unrelated story, but kind of related. I went back when I used to work in retail. I remember this woman who came in and she was a scientist, and her area of expertise was like bees and why it was so important to save them. And, she never wore makeup, she was all about work and just not fussy about anything like that. But the thing was, she was really, really fair, and you really couldn't see her eyebrows. And so when she was talking in these big rooms and on camera, like my immediate thought was like, oh my God, your eyebrows are disappearing and people can't read your facial expressions. Like it's actually a very basic human, like face-to-face thing that happens. Like, and I was kind of explaining to her, I was like, this doesn't diminish your work with the bees or the importance of your messaging. I was like, but I think if we give you like a little bit of eyebrows, people will actually hear your messages a little bit more, because they'll be able to see like your facial expressions and the passion about the things that you talk about. There's like a correlation, even as crazy as that sounds, to like messaging and being able to receive that messaging. It's not always as
relatable.
Being relatable, being, obviously like we want our political candidates to not be 100 years old, even though we keep like electing people who are 100 years old. So like they try to make them look less 100 years old. That's the power of makeup, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's all about relatability. There's another story. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Clinton or Gore, but I don't know if that's right. But it was one of the candidates, like, didn't sweat. He never sweat. And and he would go into these factories with these blue collar workers, and he wouldn't be sweating. And they literally would like spray his shirts to make it look like he was sweating.
Wow.
Remember that story so clearly. And it's all about relatability and
perception.
Yeah, even if you're not sweating, you need to look like you are.
Absolutely. I mean, the question about perception, the question about the sort of transformation into something that other people will recognize as something that is near to them, or as something that has meaning for them. That is also something that kind of helped makeup for women in general become more acceptable during World War II, right? Because during that time, it was. Could you tell me a little bit about that? Because I think it was a question of boosting morale.
Yeah, super.
Take it away, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I've done some deep dives into this. It was this very interesting dichotomy of women need to boost they need to stay beautiful to boost morale, because it's up to you to keep the home front going but still keep looking good, but at the same time you weren't allowed to look like you tried too hard. So it's that double standard. So we need you to look well put together, take care of the kids, make sure your house looks good, and also make sure that you look beautiful at the same time. Keep those fences mended, as they say, but also like don't look like you're trying too hard, because that's not good either.
I feel like it's also kind of a little bit about control, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Women were basically shamed for if their husbands like would come home and and not remember the woman that he married, like forget that you're like in the middle of a war and like now have a factory job and are doing the regular work, I think it was also a way to sort of keep women in their place, even though they were getting all these other freedoms. It's like so weird. And like, but at the same time, I know that lipstick makes me feel better. So I can say that, oh God, the oppression. But on the other hand, there is something about like, I might be in the middle of a war, but like this lipstick makes me feel glamorous while I'm working at the factory. So it's both. It's both of those things.
Yeah, it's a really interesting that particular period of time is this very fascinating confluence of all of these things happening at the same time. And look good, but not too good. And I think to your point about politics and things like that, like the War Department didn't put cosmetics on the restricted industries list. That's how important they thought it was to the war effort here at home in the US, which I think is really fascinating that even the War Department had, could see like how important that was, which is pretty fascinating. And also something else I read was that Hitler supposedly hated red lipstick. He hated makeup in general, but in particular, he hated red lipstick.
He was such a jerk,
Right, such an asshole. So a way to be, to show on your face that you were, anti-Hitler, anti-Nazi was to wear red lipstick. So I was doing
I mean, it's slightly unrelated, but I was doing an interview recently with somebody who had grown up in Germany during World War II, spent their childhood there, and remembered shortly after World War II going to a concert, a classical music concert, and the woman sitting next to him smelled of garlic, and he remembered that impression. And many years later, he discovered that actually it was a form of resistance, because the Nazis were actually saying, okay, people shouldn't eat garlic or onions because this is not German. This is something that the sort of lesser peoples eat. So like actually eating garlic and smelling of garlic could be a form of resistance.
Wow.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about sort of the 20th century and 21st century makeup industry. The first question that I wanted to ask about that was concerning sort of the ethics of the industry, because like so many other industries, the modern makeup industry faces troubling ethical questions, which range from animal testing to conditions of labor, from marketing strategies to policies of pricing. As someone who wants to use makeup as consciously and responsibly as possible today, what should I be looking out for? I mean, are there some basic guidelines for the ethical use of makeup in the 21st century?
This one's tough because it really comes down to personal choice.
Yeah.
I mean, there are more so now than ever, there's more options. So if you are vegan and you want your makeup to be vegan, there are options for you. And actually it used to be that you'd sort of have to choose between durability, wearability, and, and basically whether it was vegan or not, or natural or not. And now you don't necessarily have to. There's like a lot of companies that make really great, animal cruelty free lines. But I think that the toughest part as a consumer, I think now, is everybody's marketing like clean beauty. Like You can't see my air quotes, but air quotes, clean beauty. Which is kind of dangerous, because what is clean beauty and what is natural? Like these are lines and words you hear a lot, because everybody wants clean, natural, things that aren't going to hurt them. But there's a lot of misinformation about what is harmful or what is cancer causing or what is, good or bad for you. And I think, really the consumer has to be a little bit smart and research ingredients and figure out what their personal lines are, like what's acceptable for each individual. There's a documentary I've been meaning to watch, which I still haven't watched. I think it's called Toxic Beauty. And it's just about like what's in the makeup and what is harmful over time. But again, I mean, I joke all the time, like I love a paraben, like some things are just preservatives and some things keep, like, I have to say, like I had this makeup line, I won't say what, because we're not here to do that, but I like depotted the whole thing. I had it in my kit. It was like a natural makeup line. And then we hit COVID times and I didn't get to use any of it for a year and it all went bad, like really bad, rancid bad. And it's probably because it didn't have any stabilizers in it. You know, and so for me professionally, that isn't something I would keep in my kit. Like, I don't even think it made it 3 months or 2 months, you know? So it's just about the individual and what, you know, and of course, like if I have a client that's like, I only want XYZ, then I'm going to cater to that. And there are ways to do that, but it's really personal. Michelle, did you have a feeling about that too?
Oh yeah, I'm right on board with you there. Yeah, it's this weird thing of like, it's easier, quote, air quotes, because everything's labeled and there are so many more options for vegan and cruelty free, and that is a little more black and white. But yeah, you get into like the clean beauty aspect of things and it gets really hazy very quickly. So I think if that is important to you and you want to do that, you do have to be willing to do your research and kind of do a deeper dive to make sure that what they're using really is clean for you.
Kind of need to know your chemistry.
Like, you need to know your chemistry. And like Jessica said, like there are things that should be and or do help with makeup to keep it better long to not go bad. So it's really, you just have to be really careful and not fall for the marketing of things so easily. And I mean, also someone once told me that if you're buying from the major brands, anything L'Oreal, anything LVMH, anything owned by a huge parent company, they make most of that makeup in the same few factories in the world.
Yeah.
Like there's 2 or 3 factories, is my understanding. There's 2 or 3 factories, like in Germany, that make pencils. So, you know, if you think that if you're buying from Neutrogena, let's say, and you think that eye pencil that you're getting is that much different than MAC, let's say, it's probably not.
It may not be. Yeah, that's the thing. Price point isn't indicative of a superior product, at all. And that's kind of where it comes down to, like, hiring a trained professional makeup artist, you know, who can guide you through that. I mean, not only do we do makeup, but we work with so much product. Like, you could hire a makeup artist to help you shop or to help you demystify, like, what's the difference between this, or go through a makeup bag and help you figure out, like, what is important to spend my money on and what isn't, like, you know, because the bottom line is, like, some things are the same and some things aren't. And it's really just about knowing. The more you use product, the more you know. Like, we don't pay attention to packaging at all because the packaging to us doesn't matter a lick. It's really about going into the store, putting it on your skin, seeing it, how it wears, you know. When things are like all the rage, I'll go into the Sephora and try them. And I can tell you right away, regardless of whether that product is $5 or $50, whether it's going to last, whether it's going to look good. Like, I can just tell by the way it sits on the back of my hand, if that product was cheaply made or if that product has some nice ingredients in it, the way it blends, the way it moves, the way it absorbs, like, but it's from having done it so long, you know.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's actually a big part of what makes makeup in the 20th and 21st century so different. It's not just the industrialization of the production, but it's also the professionalization, right? I mean, the coming into existence of new professions such as the makeup artist, which you both are. So one thing that I wanted to ask you about that was concerning the situation right now, because as makeup professionals today, it must be a tough time to try to work during the coronavirus pandemic. So I wanted to ask you about the effects of the pandemic on your industry, but not so much regarding production, etc., but in terms of being a professional in the industry. What is it like to be a makeup artist in pandemic times? And do you think that this experience has any important lessons and takeaways for the industry as a whole and for the individuals who work in it?
Yes. I think that, you know, for me, God, there were so many takeaways just as a human being. You know, I worked pretty hard and steady for a very long time without much break. And then I found myself unemployed for 8 months because there was just it was just not happening. Like, to do makeup, you have to look at someone's face pretty close to them without a mask on. You know, they're not wearing a mask. We obviously are wearing lots and lots of PPE, but, you know, so I had a lot of realizations just about work. And I mean, something that I was hoping would come out of all of this, which unfortunately I'm not really seeing, was just more human care. You know, maybe like our days don't need to be 19 hours long. Like maybe we could work 8 or 10 or 12. Like I kind of wanted to see more humanity. I wanted to see more humanity come out of this.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, as things normalize, you know, it's productions right back to work and everyone's like, oh, we're so lucky to be working. Oh, we're so lucky. But, you know, my takeaway was we're not lucky to be working. Like we choose to work. It's a joy. I love my job, but you know, there's also, we need that balance. Like, my God, we need work-life balance. We need time for our families and time for the other things and the creativity to flow and, you know, all of that. I mean, the other thing that I realized too is like makeup is so much more than just about the application. You know, it's like a sacred space, it's a connection. And I was talking a little bit before we started this podcast about the joylessness of working in the pandemic. And I feel like it's because, you know, I'm wearing 2 masks and a face shield, which is pretty required. I do a lot of production work. And I feel like I'm working through a fishbowl and I can't really hear what the actor in my chair is saying or the client, and they can't really hear me. And, you know, it's like I'm thinking about all the steps I need to take to like clean everything and sanitize everything and make sure it's like COVID safe. And so the room in like your creative brain for like the spontaneity is really missing because you're constantly like, okay, then I have to sharpen this pencil and then I have to dip it in alcohol, then I have to wipe it down and then I have to like break it off and then I have to like sharpen it again and then I'm going to put it on and then I'm going to like put it in the dirty bit. Like the number of steps and the complexity, it's like we became like admin
Yeah.
people, you know, instead of like artists. And that was it's really tough. I mean, it's been really, really hard for me. I don't enjoy it. It was really, it's still kind of hard, but the silver lining is I realized the things that I'm missing more than anything is not necessarily like the work, but the collaboration. I'm really missing, you know, the beauty of creativity, the freedom of creativity, like all the things that I'm craving were like get together and just like make some weird, crazy art. You know, I did like one virtual photo shoot with one of my favorite photographers who now lives in Germany. And I just did makeup on myself and it was like this really free, creative, whatever I want. It kind of reminded me of like Cindy Sherman's work. It was just like this wild, like I painted my teeth black and like did this like weird, I was in a weird place. Like it's pandemic times. But we created this like really weird, ugly, uncomfortable, but beautiful art. And I was like, yes, that's what I want to do.
Right.
If I can monetize whatever that is. But there's beauty in that. There's beauty in the uncomfortable and the growing and the whatever. But yeah, like in general, the day-to-day work has been very difficult.
Right.
It's been very challenging. It's been very challenging emotionally and physically and in every kind of way, because when you have when you're not working, it makes you question your self-worth for sure.
Of course.
I've definitely had moments where I'm like, what am I doing here?
What does life mean?
What does life mean, basically? Should I even be trying to do this anymore? And it's been very challenging when the stakes are so high, when you know that people are dying,
Of course.
when there are people, you know, doctors and nurses and support people working 20-hour days for months in a row. It makes you question your worth in general. But I think it's important to just remember that life goes on and that we all need beauty.
Absolutely. One thing that I wanted to sort of add as a sort of add-on question there, though, is do you feel that in this process that you've both described as an incredibly hard process, do you think that there was enough, let's say, support from your professional environment or the industry or the union, or how does it work? I mean, do you think that going forward from here, there is something to be learned about how sort of makeup professionals should sort of the kind of environment, the kind of collaboration, the kind of help structure that they could create for each other?
I know that my experience is it's good that actually Michelle and I are both here to answer this question, because I think this is like it's a really good question about just the arts and support in general. And I will say that, like, because I am a union makeup artist and I'm also, like, full disclosure, the head of membership for the union at the moment, I'm the membership director, and I'm really passionate about unions and what they can do and the power of, us together. I feel like the union really supported, the artists during this time, because there were a lot of resources that people didn't know how to access, and the union really helped connect people to the loans that were available and the Actors Fund. And, there were just a lot of resources that I wouldn't have had if I'd been out in the world just as a regular freelancer. I know that a lot of people were able to pay their bills and feed their kids because of the union support that they had. And it really made a huge difference. I know that we had, it was still difficult to navigate the unemployment, but I know that there was help for us. There were resources we had if we were having trouble. Whereas a lot of my friends who were not union, they were kind of just floating in space and really didn't have anybody to call or to ask for help or to navigate it, because it's all very confusing.
Yeah.
Right.
It didn't fix it, but I definitely felt really lucky to at least, and also with just the guidelines for going back to work, they wrote up contracts that were not necessarily binding, but it was this is how we're going to go back to work when we do it. This is how it's going to look. This is what it should be. And there were people working tirelessly behind the scenes to put that together and to create some sort of safety net and some sort of structure so that when we did go back to work on set, there were very clear guidelines for us. And I know that also wasn't really happening in fashion. I was seeing a lot of random things and people being very cavalier, and there was no one to be accountable to. And, with unions, it was the SAG union, which is for the actors. It was our union. It was the LA union. They kind of all got together and said, no, when you go back to work, this is what it's got to be. I mean, we were tested every other day. We had PPE provided for us. We had, there was just a lot put into place so that we could work safely, or as safe as we could. I mean, I worked for a show for 8 months, and knock on wood, but we made it through. Nobody
Amazing.
in my department, had came into contact. Now that's not always the case, but I really felt pretty much day to day safer than I would have if I was out there on my own. But yeah, Michelle, I know that's.
I think, I mean, it's interesting to have my side of it too. It's, no, I've looked longingly at the union like a kid with their nose pressed to the glass. And it's been nice to see. I mean, I'm really glad to hear that the union was there doing that for you. I think if anything, this has all proven that how important unions are. And
that's what it's for, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right. I mean, these kinds of things that we sort of maybe even kind of take for granted, or we don't really see the necessity for them until the day comes. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, it's been interesting to see. On Facebook, there's a Facebook group for makeup artists just trying to help each other out. Makeup and hair people, how to navigate the unemployment system together. So it's been really great to see that happen, and there's been a lot of help with people just trying to help each other, and that's been really great to see. It hasn't been in an organized way, of course, like Jessica's been talking about, but that has been happening, and that's been really, really lovely to see people, for the most part, really just wanting to support each other and help each other as best they can, because it's a very complicated, unnecessarily complicated, confusing system.
Right. And I mean, I think if there is one overarching lesson to be learned from something like this, then it's the value of solidarity in a way. So I can hear that from what both of you are saying. Jessica, Michelle, thank you so much for this conversation, which I appreciated, not just for your fascinating insights into the world of makeup, but also for showing us that critical thinking is not just some academic obsession, but a tangible, fruitful way for us to approach all aspects of life. From medieval philosophy to makeup, if you will forgive the lame alliteration. So thank you once again for sharing your thoughts with us. And I hope we can get together again in person soon, maybe as soon as the Paris Fashion Week is up and running again.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Can't wait.
Absolutely.
I will say this one thing though, this pandemic has reminded me, we always talk about the Roaring 20s. We cover that in the class that we teach. Like that was right after the 1918 pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I never really put the two and two together, but we're going to have some pretty roaring, whatever thousandth year it is when this is
really
over.
Sorry.
So much lipstick, so much makeup, so much creativity, so much parties.
Well,
Very much looking forward to post-COVID life for many
So
reasons.
much travel.
Yeah.
I'm already looking forward to it.
Hugs. So many hugs.
This brings us to the end of yet another episode of PICT Voices. If you, our listeners, would like to support the volunteer work that we're doing at our nonprofit institution, the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking, you may consider becoming a member of our community. You can find more information on how to join PICT on our website. In the meantime, my name is David Selim Sayers. I was joined today by makeup artists Michelle Coursey and Jessica Padilla, and I hope we have the chance to challenge you with another PICT podcast soon. Goodbye.